Good morning and welcome to this virtual meeting of the West of England Combined Authority Audit Committee, which is being broadcast on the authority's YouTube channel. Can I start by welcoming John Roberts, who is our new external audit partner, and David Bray, who is our new external audit manager. Welcome both. We will give you a chance to speak to us in due course on the agenda, but it's good to have you on board. Item 2 on the agenda is apologies for absence, and we have no apologies. Item 3 is declarations of interest. Members, can I check whether you have any declarations that need to be made before the start of this meeting? No. Item 4, minutes of the meeting held on the 10th of December have been circulated. Is everybody happy that I virtually sign those as a correct record of this meeting? Is anybody against? No. Okay, I will do that. Item 5 is public forum, and we have a statement from Councillor Steve Clark as chair of the WECA Audit Committee. Tim, is Steve joining us?
I don't believe he's joining us, Chair.
No, so therefore that I can tell you that was a statement agreed by the scrutiny committee, and felt that given the level of risk that it was important that the attention was drawn of the audit committee. I think Gary, you were also at that scrutiny meeting. Did you want to add something?
No, it's been circulated by Steve and approved by us. I was just about to point out that he's not chair of the audit committee, he's chair of the scrutiny committee.
That's what I meant to say, but Bristol members will understand I'm a little meeting weary at the moment, so things might not come out quite as I intended. So thank you for that correction, Gary. Okay, so we note that statement and we move on. Item 6, I have no chair's business or announcements. So we go straight into 7, the internal audit plan consultation. Malcolm, are you leading on that, or are we going straight to Jeff?
Happy to go straight to Jeff, Chair. Okay,
Jeff, over to you.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, everyone. So this is item 7 in your pack, which is pages 9 to 12. And today we're asking for your input from the Audit Committee to the internal audit plan process for 2021-22. So just briefly, on page 10, section 4.1 of the report, we set out the process we go through to prepare the plan each year. And we use what we call the reasonable assurance model. And some members of the committee who've been with us since the start of WECA may remember I've given quite detailed briefings on this in the past, where we go through 8 key themes of good governance and assess levels of risk and assurance. And this model helps us prioritise where we think attention is required in terms of the audit plan. So I've just given a brief overview of this process in the report. I'm very happy at any time to go through that detail again. So just for reference, the plan does not and can never cover everything in one annual cycle. We have to make judgments over finite resources and key issues facing the organisation each year. And so it's a risk-based plan. Its ultimate purpose is to give assurance to you as the Audit Committee, the Section 151 officer and senior management of WECA, that the systems of internal control and risk management are reasonable. And each year in my own annual report to the committee, I have to give a formal opinion which confirms this or otherwise, and the planned work helps me make that opinion. At the last meeting, we did describe that the pandemic and the changes to the way everyone has had to work remotely, from home primarily, have not only made auditing much more challenging, but more importantly, have changed the risk and control environment. And so it's much more difficult to give the depth of assurance that we previously offered. Putting that to one side though, we all hope that in 21-22, we will see some steps to return to whatever may be a new normal. And so we're here today to ask for your views on what you think is important for us to consider and review in the next year in relation to the West of England Combined Authority. We've already started that consultation process with senior management and key officers, And the key audit committee is clearly a key stakeholder as you ultimately approve the plan. Section 4.2 of the report sets out where we are in the process in terms of current allocation of topics and days, along with the list of the top risks for all organisations to consider, which were given to us from the Chartered Institute of Internal Auditors. And obviously you heard from Pete Charles in your informal briefing about fraud risks. So I hope that was helpful in explaining some of the detail of what kind of work we can actually do. So very happy to take questions, ideas, comments, both today formally, but also informally after the meeting. So if there are any things that you think of afterwards, please do not hesitate to raise them through the chair. The plan is flexible and can change as necessary during the year. And really open to questions and comments and ideas. Thank you.
We'll start off with Don.
Thanks, Jeff and Jeff. Bearing in mind, as you've said, Jeff, this coming year, well, this past year has been a challenging one for audit and challenging to give the depth of assurance that we'd all hope for. What things are you planning to do differently this coming year from what you would have done if it was another year as part of the cycle? Does that make sense?
No, it makes absolute sense. So in a sense, we were in a process since the start of WECA to focus a lot of our time and energy around the core elements of good governance and the core foundations of what an organisation needs to do. So we will focus very much on core systems, payroll, creditors, payments, treasury management, all those sort of basics. And we would hope to move from that once we're, feel satisfied that those things are working effectively onto more direct projects in terms of WECA's delivery ambitions. Obviously, we've gone through this very tough year, so I think what that basically means is we will still end up this year spending still a significant amount of time, and that's why the plan is as it is at the moment around some of those core aspects. Everyone's still delivering the same services, but they're delivering them from home. And we're making payments and managing a lot of significant amounts of money from home in our own home environment. So I think as we move through this year and potentially move to some kind of return to the workplace, even if it's a partial return to the workplace, I think we will need to ensure that we still cover off that and ensure that the systems are working effectively. So in terms of general sense, that's why you'll see that many of the days from last year haven't changed hugely in terms of this particular year.
Thanks. If I could push you a little bit more, are there no special things that you're thinking or you're discovering in consultation with the senior management? Might be particular areas of risk that you feel those are the first things I'd like to get and have a good look at when I'm back?
I think we actually touched on it at our last meeting, actually. So, Pete touched on his presentation. So fraud risk and cyber risk are the two things which is definitely prevalent in our thinking. And as Malcolm says, whilst there is a significant amount of grant money around in the public sector, primarily WECA isn't administering a lot of grant money. It's mostly, as he said, in the adult education budget and in smaller pots. So that level of risk, which is massively prevalent in local authorities, is not necessarily the same in the combined authority. It's still relevant and needs to be looked at, but it's not the same type of risk that's very conscious to us in our constituent authorities. So there is a different way that we'll look at the combined authority than how we would look at a local authority as such.
That's very helpful. Thanks, Jeff.
Clear.
Thank you. I think it's interesting to be able to review the productivity of staff working from home as opposed to being in the office. I'm sure that's something that we're going to hopefully scrutinise quite a bit, and not just presume that we will all just go back to the office full time, etc. when we can. Just also looking 4.2.4, management talent, staff wellbeing and diversity challenges post-pandemic. I'm really encouraged to see that specifically listed there. And we know there have been sections of our community and presumably staff workforce who may have been impacted more by the pandemic, disability being one of the key ones. So again, being able to really drill down and know what we're putting in place in terms of support and things towards the well-being of our staff, I think is something that should be well monitored.
Jeff, do you want? Are you
Yeah, I mean,
responding?
I think it was more of a statement, really, than a kind of a question.
Yeah.
You know, it is absolutely acknowledged that it's down there as one of the risks. Obviously, it's a much higher risk, again, going back to constituent authorities because of the scale and scope of and number of people that are engaged in those constituent authorities. Obviously, WECA has a much smaller number of staff, so those risks are less. They're still there, but they are less. So yeah, and absolutely, those are things that we will have in our mind and we'll be considering through all of our pieces of work, all of those risks listed out in that 4.2.4 section.
So Jeff, I had a few points just looking at this, because if I look at 4.2.3, we've got IT audit and we've got counter fraud and corruption, and I'm guessing that includes cyber fraud. But I think, given the significance of it, not just because of the presentation we had before this meeting, but I think I'd want to see cyber crime included very specifically within that work rather than implicitly within it. So that was one point. In that section, you've got the LEP as the first item and corporate governance as the second item. So given the general comments made by members both here and at scrutiny, I'd like to know that includes corporate governance of the LEP. I'm sure it does, but I think I'd like to see the two linked together as well as being shown separately. I think the working from home issue is one that we perhaps would be interested in knowing more of how we're addressing. And I was wanting to link that, and this is possibly a personal thing for me, but my knowledge of systems and controls is old-fashioned enough to be when everything was a paper copy. And I just wonder whether it would be useful for members to have the chance to understand a little more of how the checks and balances exist in an electronic age when that links in with working from home, when documents are not necessarily received in paper form. And I think an understanding of that might help members to understand the issues that you and your team are having to deal with in terms of systems and controls and checks.
Yeah, I think some very helpful comments there. I mean, in terms of the items you said, in terms of representing them, in terms of the plan, that's absolutely not an issue at all. And I'll make sure that cyber is definitely listed. The corporate governance, yeah, absolutely. As you said, that does pick up all aspects. Obviously, it's a catch-all statement to cover all aspects of corporate governance, which includes both WECA's responsibilities and in terms of the LEP as such. In terms of the internal control question, it probably is more helpful, whether that's as an informal briefing or part of a formal report, almost to kind of do a walkthrough, like a case study. I think that's probably the easiest way to help you, and that whether that's through a flow chart or physically showing you how the various elements of the control system work. That's probably the easiest way to do it. I'll probably have to talk to Malcolm and officers about the most simple way to do that, because obviously, while we're working remotely, it can present some challenges in showing that in a large group environment. But we'll definitely take that one away and see how we can help you with that.
Okay, that's great. Thank you, Jeff. Andy.
Thank you, Chair. I'm looking at 4.2.4, the supply chain disruption and third-party solvency for critical suppliers. And it occurs to me that although it's mentioned elsewhere, Brexit and COVID-19 might have quite a significant effect in your consultation process going forward. So I just wondered if these things, particularly Brexit, is having a concern for you going forward.
Well, I'll probably leave Malcolm to talk about the impacts of Brexit from a WECA perspective. But in terms of that particular item and that risk, which has been identified there, again, I think that is an absolutely key risk for constituent authorities. From a WECA perspective, it doesn't have a massive list of critical suppliers and providers. So that risk is much more contained and much easier to kind of manage and give assurance over. So it's not that we don't look at it or not aware of it. It's to do with the scale and scope. So when we're looking at the kind of risk-based approach, we would take note of that. But certainly from a constituent authority, it's night and day, effectively, in terms of that sort of level of risk. It's very significant in constituent authorities. It's not very relevant in WECA's perspective in terms of the scale of risk as such. In terms of Brexit, I'm not sure I can add anything that probably hasn't already been said, unless Malcolm wants to add anything in terms of Brexit and WECA. I don't know whether you want to add anything, Malcolm.
Yeah, I think for me, the supply chain risk is relevant, less so on Brexit, but more so in terms of coming out of COVID. So we are, as a combined authority, moving more into the world of a delivery organisation, as you know. So we're delivering a multi-million-pound regional rail programme, for example. We've got £24 million worth of future transport zone, which is a massive project which is going to take off over the coming months. So as we move more into delivery, I think the risk regarding the solvency of the supply chain is very relevant, but I think it's more about the stability of that supply chain coming out of the pandemic, which is more prominent for us than Brexit as such. At the moment, we've got the right checks and balances in place. We don't perceive being any problems, and we're delivering pretty much across the board as per time and as per budget. But it's a risk that we all face. If we're delivering major capital projects, it's got to be a risk which is quite high on our agenda.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay. Tom.
Sorry, Jeff, just the last minute one that came to mind. It's just this point about, so apologies if I missed this, but just touching upon 4.2.4 about the professional bodies giving guidance in some areas. And that final one, the climate change point that's made. Jeff, how do we, and also bearing in mind the climate emergency declaration made by WECA as well as the unitary authorities, how is consideration of a climate emergency declaration embedded in an internal audit approach? How are we, I mean, don't get me wrong, I appreciate this is all very early. In a number of aspects, this is all quite early days in relation to a response to climate emergency. But are we in a place now where embedded, for example, in every internal audit report is consideration of whether things are found that are congruent or incongruent even with a declaration of a climate emergency? And I'm sorry, I'm not necessarily expecting a full answer now, but it'd be quite interesting to see how that strand is now embedded in internal audit. Are there any initial thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good question and the right type of question. And we've been asking that question ourselves in terms of how we can ensure that we are looking at this significant risk as it's become a key priority for pretty much every local authority right across the country. So I think, as you said, in many cases, we are at a relatively immature and early stage in terms of what each authority itself is doing or wanting to do. It's got huge ambition, but those actions haven't yet been implemented. So I think from an internal audit perspective, we would look at it from a more corporate perspective. Is there a proper corporate plan in place in relation to how we're going to tackle climate emergency? What does that mean? Are the resources set aside? How are people being trained and upskilled to understand what that means? And then how are those things being impacted throughout the whole of the governance and decision-making process? So we'd look at that from that perspective. I think as those things start to develop over the next couple of years or so, we would then look to see how we could then embed that within each individual review, like we embed fraud within each individual review. There are some really good examples, and actually Pete Charles, who gave the presentation earlier on fraud, is a bit of an expert on climate change, and he's happy to talk about that in another informal session about what internal audit can do. But I would say that, we're still at quite an early stage. It is absolutely the right question, but our approach is probably focused at the corporate level first. before we then go down to how we embed that in every single audit review.
So are we likely then to see reference to that in the, for example, the corporate governance work that's in the timetable?
Exactly right. So we'd be asking questions. Okay. When have you got a corporate plan? Those kind of basic questions. But then of those priorities, what are the plans behind those priorities to ensure that you're absolutely delivering on them? So whether it's your constituent council or the West of England Combined Authority, it's the same question. And that's, those kind of questions sit behind those corporate governance themes, absolutely. If we found something that we felt we were way off target, that would identify a priority, as I said, through that model that picks that area out. And then we say, actually, we're going to have some more focused time on that. And we put it into the audit plan itself for more focused work.
Thanks.
Jeff's probably not going to thank me for saying this, but I think that the biggest impact a combined authority can make on climate change is where we place our investment. So members will know we've got our 350 million investment programme to March 23. We'll be looking to extend that to have a rolling 5-year investment programme for WECA. Obviously, a lot of what we're investing in will contribute positively towards climate change. So we're looking to increase public transport and rail and bus. We're investing heavily in walking and cycling. And each individual project, climate change is considered in terms of the evaluation criteria when we actually decide what projects enter the WECA programme. But could we be doing more? And I think it's not just climate change, it's also, have we got it right coming out of COVID? Is there some, so I'm suggesting, is there some value added work that audit might be able to help with in terms of what's being done elsewhere? Are we missing a trick? Now, I think a lot of our investment is contributing positively, but we're up for learning. So are there other things that combined authorities are doing which would contribute more, and could we be more structured? That could be something that, rather than a compliance audit, maybe a value added piece of audit might add value to our investment programme. Sorry, Jeff.
So is it possible I just can add to that as well? I just wanted to provide a bit of assurance over our planning process, and just to say that we are including climate risks as a bigger part of our audit planning process, and those questions have been asked in management meetings, and we're basically moving a little bit more towards the way we look at climate in terms of risk. So everyone knows the risks in terms of the actual climate impacts. But there's other risks for a combined authority or a local authority, which are probably more relevant. So like the reputational impact or reputational risk of making decisions that are out of line with the commitments. So we've seen elsewhere in the country that there's been decisions that have been made out of line with what the councils have declared, and then you see the reputational damage that causes. So we're kind of trying to evolve our view of what the climate risks are. So yeah.
So I think, just following on from this, I was going to say that I think, in a way, rather than putting the question directly at internal audit, this probably might well tie in with the next item, which is the risk management framework, because in a sense, it's how we assess the risk management issues first that internal audit then have to look at. So my suggestion is that I'll take Gary's question or comment and then move on to the next item on the agenda. Gary.
Yeah, the answer just now is good in terms of avoiding negatives. I do think that we need, as we're looking at investment coming out of COVID and recovery, and combining that with the ability to improve environmental performance, that where we target grants are going to be very important. And we have a really very good opportunity in this part of the world to combine the two factors together very effectively. And we need to make certain that that we're actually doing that as an organisation.
Thank you, Gary. So members happy if we move on to item 8 on the agenda? Okay, so that is the risk management framework. And Malcolm,
Linda Bird's going to join for this item at 11 o'clock in 5 minutes' time. I've just sent her an email to say we're just running slightly ahead of schedule. If it's okay if you, Chair, well, we could go for the external audit item from John Roberts, and then we can bring Linda in for the risk. Oh, she's joined us now. Seamless.
I'm just letting her in from the waiting room now, Chair.
Fantastic. Ignore me, Chair.
I wouldn't dare to, Malcolm.
I think I'm here.
Oh,
You are.
Welcome, Linda. Right, we're straight into the risk management framework.
Thank you very much. The purpose of this item is to present the updated risk management framework for 21 for committee endorsement. The framework sets out our approach to identifying and managing the risks associated with delivery of our business plan. In summary, that approach is that each directorate manages a risk register which is reviewed each month by the directorate management team. Those in turn are informed by the project and programme risk registers. Our corporate risk register is reviewed each month by the WECA management team, which is our senior management team and heads of service, and that is reviewed alongside the directorate risk registers. And then there is a quarterly strategic review of the corporate risk register by SMT as part of our regular progress reporting. The framework itself is reviewed annually by SMT, and we also discuss management of risk with internal audit as part of the reasonable assurance model. For 2021, there were no substantive changes recommended to the framework. We've included a draft with the report together with the current corporate risk register for committee comments, which I would welcome.
Thank you, Linda. Right, who would like to go first? Or indeed, Tom, do you want to carry on with the climate emergency item that you raised on the last item?
I'm happy to comment on. Should I take that bit, Jeff? Is now a good time to? Should I pick that bit up?
Yeah, please.
Then it was just. Were you with us in the tail end of that last agenda point? Beg your pardon. Sorry. No,
I'm terribly sorry.
No, that's fine. No, that's fine. No. Then it was only when we were discussing the internal audit sort of plan. I was reflecting on the fact, and some other members were, about how we try and sort of embed the climate emergency declaration and sort of statements of intent into our work as a combined authority. And I was admittedly, I raised it under the internal audit sort of banner, but Jeff very fairly said actually it probably fits as even more appropriately under the section that you're talking about now. And I guess it would just be really helpful to have a reflection in your mind from your perspective about what the impact of making a climate emergency declaration and those subsequent statements of intent from both the unitary authorities and WECA have on this work, on the work that we're looking at with you. Are you happy to reflect a bit on that?
I can try and give you some reflections on that. That's quite a wide question in terms of its relevance to the corporate risk framework. We both reflect the risk of the climate emergency in our risk register, which is where that we recognizing that not all of those mitigating activities are within WECA's responsibilities or indeed gift. I'm not sure I quite understand your question, but
well, I guess ultimately, if WECA has declared we've declared a climate emergency, we've got unitary authorities that have declared a climate emergency. We've got statements of intent flowing from that. And I guess when we're then starting to operate as an authority within that area where we're targeting carbon zero and all the other aspects that go with it, how are we going to ensure that the framework we're discussing now under this agenda helps to support that statement and that objective, I guess? And are we correctly capturing? Are we correctly framing our work in this area with that as the wider context? Does that help at all? Sorry, I appreciate we're all sort of learning an awful lot about how we all adapt our work in light of having made these declarations, because in many senses, we all know making the declaration is, as we all know, the easy bit. Doing the work is the really complicated bit, and how to embed it. And so we're all learning in this. So it's as much a sort of, it might be that your response is more along the lines of, look, we are all as a collective within the combined authority working to understand what the impact of that is and how we then seek to embed it, the impact of the declaration. But I don't know, that's my sort of thinking, and I don't know, it might be that other members can assist, can help you more, but that's my thinking. Anyway.
Yeah, sorry, I think we're in danger of going down a bit of a rabbit hole on this one. I mean, this is a risk management item, obviously, isn't it? So the role of this committee in terms of governance is, have we got the right process in place for managing risk? Are we highlighting the right risk, and have we got mitigation in place? The climate change item is on the risk register. It's R008 in the papers. So we recognise it as a risk to the combined authority, and we're actively pursuing mitigation. Is the mitigation sufficient enough? I don't think is necessarily something we can thrash out in this committee. It's something I think we need to look at possibly through scrutiny if we feel that we haven't put sufficient mitigation in place. I think this committee needs to focus on, have we got the appropriate risk management arrangements in place in the authority? Are they working effectively? And are we highlighting the key risks to the authorities, which I think we are, but I think that's a debate we need to probably focus on in this committee.
But Malcolm, so just on that point, taking R008. So R008 says most of the mitigating activities required to address the climate change emergency sit outside of WECA's responsibilities and control. I think that's the bit we're looking at there, isn't it? R008. But is the risk that we are not doing as much as we can within our operations to meet our to meet the declaration and the objectives that we have set ourselves under a climate emergency declaration? Is that not the risk?
Yeah, and I think if you look at it in terms of the action, go across on the row on that one, we've developed 250,000 for business cases to understand, are we doing enough as a combined authority? So I think, as I referred to in the last item, Tom, a lot of what we're doing in the WECA investment programme is contributing positively towards the climate change in terms of increasing public transport, increasing walking and cycling, taking congestion off the roads. We've allocated money for business cases to see, is there more we should be doing as an investment programme? And I think that's the issue we need to drill down on. I think that's what I was referring to under internal audit. Are there things which others are doing which we haven't included in our plan? Have we got it right? I think we can hide behind the fact we're invested in a lot of things which are going to contribute positively, but is there something else we should be doing? And I think that's what we mean by looking at those business cases. But I don't think it's, we're going to answer that one today. I think it's something we need to probably bring back through scrutiny in terms of, are we invested in our WECA programme in the right area to take this, and as I said, every individual project we do consider climate change in terms of the evaluation criteria, but are we doing enough in terms of the overall plan? I think it's a question that we can be challenged.
Okay. I guess it's helpful also to hear what you're saying about, because I perhaps didn't draw it out from the risk register, everything, those responses to the risk that you've detailed there, I probably hadn't drawn out in such full clarity from reading the risk register. So long as that's captured and that's a work stream that's been caught through the risk map, then I guess that's fine. That's fine. Yeah.
Can I suggest, if members are happy, that this is something that post the Bristol elections and the WECA mayoral election, that it might be appropriate, Malcolm, for the chairs and vice chairs of audit and scrutiny to meet and discuss how this is dealt with in a constructive way, because I think that we cannot get into the detail of how it's dealt with, but scrutiny may well be interested in doing so, and it might, when we know what the membership is of both committees, be worth having that meeting and discussion.
Makes absolute sense, Chair. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Mark and then Cleo.
Thank you, Chair. I guess from a comprehensive framework review. Thanks very much, Linda. It's looking good. I guess that there are RAG statuses below this framework that will guide the risk review. But the question I've got is who challenges, from a rigor point of view, the goals within the framework, and where do they get challenged?
Well, internal audit, we discuss the framework with internal audit every year, as I said, as part of the reasonable assurance model. So at that point, they would look at the scoring criteria that we have. And then so that is on the framework side of things. And in terms of the actual operational challenge of that comes through performance planning and projects, and we report regularly to management team and then to WECA senior management team, which is our chief executive and directors.
So if it helps.
Okay, and from a goal point of view, sorry.
I was only going to add to that, Mark, that Linda's right. You know, the actual framework is challenged in terms of internal audit, but in terms of the process internally, we consider directorate risks on a monthly basis. So each directorate in WECA will look at it, have its own risk register, and that gets escalated on a regular basis to SMT. So the corporate risk register you see as part of this pack has gone through 2 lots of internal challenge, and quite often when it gets to the SMT challenge, we'll make sure that the actual RAG rating on it is consistent. We might sort of modify that risk through the SMT beyond the directorate challenge. So it's quite robust in terms of, you know, the officer challenge before it gets here, but the framework is really for this committee to govern on the advice of audit.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Cleo.
Yeah, I just quickly wanted to support and thank Councillor Davies in raising the climate emergency aspect of monitoring and within the audit context, because it should be a priority, as I'm sure we all agree. And I do feel there's a bit of a blur sometimes between the roles of audit and scrutiny, but I'm also happy with your follow-up suggestion, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Cleo. Does anybody else want to contribute on this item? No? Okay, in which case we move on. Thank you to item 9, monitoring and evaluation framework, pages 27 to 38. Malcolm, are you leading on this, or?
I will present this. Thank you, Chair.
Oh, right.
So
at least you've been here for the discussion beforehand this time.
Indeed. So the purpose of this is to present you with the annual monitoring and evaluation framework for your endorsement. This framework brings together all of WECA's reporting requirements into one single document. It sets out our governance arrangements, our approach to business planning through our operating framework, and the alignment of our key strategies that inform then the allocation of our investment fund. It sets out our reporting cycles, which focus on 3 levels. There's delivery of our annual business plan, which is our in-year activity to support WECA and the LEP. It looks at our monitoring our project and programme delivery, which is focused on the schemes that are funded through the investment fund, Transforming Cities, our One Front Door programme. And it also looks at the monitoring of a longer term organisational impact, a large amount of which is measured through our 5-year gateway reviews. As I said, the framework is updated annually, and we have included a draft for 2021 as an annex to your report. The basis of the framework is unchanged from last year, but we have made a few changes to remove some of the duplication, and specifically we have signposted to the published project list, which contains monitoring and evaluation plans for each scheme, in place of duplicating this in what was becoming a rather lengthy appendix. And we have included the strategic outcomes from our 2021 business plan to demonstrate more how these align into the core reporting process. We share this framework annually with government, typically in the autumn, but due to the pandemic, the date for submission was delayed until after this committee has met, following which we will submit a copy of this to government. That was all I was going to say, Chair. I'm happy to take any comments and questions.
Okay. Who would like to go first? Well done, Linda. You've stunned everybody into silence. That's anyone? Oh yes, I've got a couple there. Don, followed by Andy.
All right, thanks, Linda. Could I ask whether this is something that government has asked for or something we have voluntarily put together and submitted?
This was requested by BEIS. It's a requirement for all mayoral combined authorities.
Okay, thanks.
Andy?
Thank you, Chair. My question is on the infrastructure, excuse me, on page 35 of the report. There's a very impressive list there of the achievable or the aspirations of WECA to put all these things in place. 500,000 new bus journeys, 1.38 new rail services per year, but then we get to delivery of 13 kilometres of improved cycle and walking paths. Now, to my mind, that doesn't seem very impressive. 13 centimetres. Centimetres would not be impressive. The 13 kilometres of new, improved cycle and walking paths. I was under the impression that WECA, this was a major aspect of WECA's work. It doesn't sound to me to be that good. So is that, can you please comment?
I can explain where the figures have come from. These are cumulative figures of current funded projects, and I can see Malcolm has also put his hand up, but that is where these numbers have come from. But Malcolm.
I think it's a very good question. What we've done until the last sort of 15 months or so is we've evaluated the outcomes of each individual project, and we're very keen these metrics that we put in this plan reflect the sum of its parts. So what's the outcome we're expecting by March 23 of a whole £350 million WECA programme? And you're right, 13 kilometres of walking and cycling is not impressive, but bearing in mind this is a very short-term investment programme, and hopefully members be aware that we've recently approved a £10 million allocation to walking and cycling from the WECA investment programme. The outcomes from that probably won't be all in place by March 23. So I think we've got to get better at forward forecasting the impact of our investments. So I think the 13 kilometres reflect what's been approved now in terms of the known business cases. Having agreed £10 million fairly recently, I think those outcomes are going to increase quite significantly in that area, and quite rightly so. I do think while we're on the subject of metrics, though, it's very difficult because when we put the investment programme together, it was, and some of the estimated outcomes from our investment programme, it was pre-COVID. So in terms of, we might be doing absolutely right things and investing in trains and in buses. Are we going to achieve the same level of increase in patronage, bearing in mind people's behaviours as we come out of the pandemic? That needs to be kept under constant review in terms of how we manage our performance.
So I'm assuming, therefore, that with the 10 million going in, there will be lots more cycling and that will be reported in. But are you suggesting that there won't be more than 13 kilometres by 2023? Because that sounds like quite a long way away.
Well, what I'm suggesting is the £10 million has been approved for walking and cycling. We wait for the individual business cases to come through, working with the unitary authorities. Once we know what the business cases are, we can add to the 13 kilometres. Okay. But the 10 million is a broad allocation. What we need to understand is all individual schemes within that 10 million, and then we can add to the 13 kilometres.
Okay, that's I understand that now. Thank you.
Clear.
Thank you. Yes, just referring to point 8, actually, project and programme evaluation. It was something I think we briefly touched on in our pre-meet, and it's just about the monitoring of projects and grants and ensuring that we have got sufficient things in place. I mean, it sounds all right. I mean, there was, in terms of making sure that what is reported back to us, I think we've identified that adult education is the biggest grant provider we're providing, just making sure that there's some way of being able to dip in and actually qualify the information that's coming back to make sure that it is reaching what it said it is supposed to reach. I do note it says plans will identify the resources required to deliver the proposed monitoring and evaluation activities. And I wondered if there's anything else you could say about that.
I'm happy to go first, Malcolm, if that's helpful. So all of our plans do have a requirement that we do allocate enough resource to provide monitoring and evaluation. That will vary according to the type of award. If it's a discrete grant from government, that might be a national evaluation, as sometimes happens, or it's something that we would agree that is a regional or a WECA-led evaluation. In terms of that process and that monitoring and reporting, in Malcolm's team, our head of grant assurance provides quarterly updates on our investment programme, which go through to WECA and joint committee, which set out our progress against each scheme and each grant. And I would hope that does give the transparency that you're looking for. Malcolm, I don't know if you want to say any more about that.
Yeah, I think in terms of the performance and monitoring of spend, it's every committee cycle. There's an investment fund report which details all of the programs and projects we're investing in, and the allocation of the whole 350 million. Likewise, we have a one front door report which goes to every joint committee detailing all of the local growth fund schemes and economic development fund schemes. Each project have got defined outcomes against it, and when we put anything into the investment program, we have a link in a public report into the business case. So at any stage, you can drill down to say, what is it we're trying to achieve from this investment in whatever project it might be. That is really transparent. I think, as I said to him in the last response, what we've got to get better at is understanding the sum of its parts. So how does that whole thing join up? Because if you're going to increase, public transport take up and reduce congestion, it's normally a combination of things which are going to influence that. And I think, although in this report we're starting to demonstrate that, it's something we need to continue to improve as we go through. In terms of monitoring on adult education budget, that is different. That's grant giving, as you quite rightly say. And we do have regular reports. We have a adult education team who receive returns from all of the providers, and we monitor the delivery of outcomes versus the spend from those grants. We report annually on that, but the information's there should scrutiny wish to look at in any time, because we do report on a quarterly basis.
Okay, yeah, thank you. And I guess sometimes, without going into too much detail, there can be softer outcomes. Of course, qualifications, getting into work, those are all very measurable and tangible, but some of these projects may have softer outcomes, confidence building, etc. And I guess hoping that if there are areas where projects haven't come out with desired results, it's not necessarily that they've totally failed, but it's just ensuring that there's support there as well to ensure that they can succeed.
Okay, anybody else want to comment? No? Okay. Thank you, Linda. So we move on to item 10, which is the audit progress report. And I'm guessing we're going straight to you, John.
Yes, thank you very much. We will both speak to this short report, just partly so that you can get to know us a little bit. I'll introduce myself, and then David will follow. David will cover off the sort of the progress part, maybe a bit of coverage on the COVID elements, and then I'll bring out just a couple of highlights of what's going on in external audit in local authorities at the moment. So I'm a partner in Grant Thornton. I've been a local auditor for 34 years now. I've started at the Audit Commission and spent roughly the first half of my career at the Audit Commission in Cardiff. I then moved to Robson Roads in Bristol for a number of years from 2002, and then went to lead our Birmingham office public sector team from 2007 for the next eight years. Coming back to Bristol, so I now lead the Southwest Grant Thornton public sector team out of Bristol. I also have a couple of hats that I wear for the firm. One is to represent us with external stakeholders, so whether that's government, the National Audit Office, SIPFA, all the main stakeholders in our world. The one is to lead the Southwest team, and the final one is as an engagement leader, and that's in the capacity that I'm here. Really pleased to be taking on this audit from Barry. I also audit Bristol City Council. I'm just also in the process of taking on the audit of North Somerset Council, and what's been less relevant in the past, but might be more relevant with the white paper now, NHS Bristol, North Somerset, South Gloucestershire, CCG. So I've got now a good local portfolio that should give me a sort of a good oversight about what's going on in the component public bodies as well as clearly as the WECA agenda. Okay, David.
Thank you. Hello, good morning, everyone. I'm David Brigham, the Senior Manager for the audit, and like John, looking forward to working with you. By way of background, John and I are the same age, so our careers sort of started off together. So we both worked for what was the originally District Audit and then the Audit Commission, and our careers parted, and then they've come back together again. And I've been with Grant Thornton for almost 10 years. And John and I work on a number of other audits together. So again, although we're new to you, we're not new to each other in terms of working together as a team. So really looking forward to working with you for the next few years. In terms of our progress report, I'll assume it has been read. It's very much a holding position as far as we're concerned as your external auditors. So we've completed the 1920 audit in accordance with the revised deadline and issued the opinion in November of last year. Then went on to issue the annual audit letter, and our expectation is to take our audit plan to you to the next audit committee. So it's very much a holding position, as I said. There's a couple of points there really that I just wanted to draw to your attention in terms of the update. The first one is in terms of timing of the external audit. Again, that's very much up in the air at the moment. So MHCLG are out to consultation with various local authorities regarding the timing of the work. You'll appreciate that back in 1819, the deadline was the end of July, and last year was extended to the end of November, although it's fair to say that probably only about half the authorities were actually audited by the end of November. So there's a real pressure in the system, both with internal audit and external audit, in terms of completing work to the original timetable. So the deadline by which you need to prepare the accounts and the deadline for the target for the completion of the audit is still out to consultation, and that's not helpful for you in terms of formulating your future looking plans. So hopefully by the time we get to the next audit committee, there will be some clarity as far as that's concerned. And also the other issue which John will explore on a little bit more is the change to the National Audit Office's Code of Audit Practice, and that sets out the work that external auditors are required to do. And there's been a fundamental change to the work that we're required to do as far as value for money is concerned. It's a change that we as a firm broadly welcome. I think it's a positive move, but it's probably the biggest change to that aspect of our work for quite a number of years. So we just wanted, before we bring the audit plan to you, just to explore that with you a little bit more in terms of both the work that we'll be undertaking and also the way in which we'll report to you at the conclusion of the process, because it is a significant change from previous years.
Thank you, David.
Okay, if I can pick up, there's just a couple more highlights if I can pick up on the document before we just take any questions. One is on page 54, which is the Redmond review, and I'm not sure how much cited the committee would have been on the review. This was commissioned by the Secretary of State following concerns that local audit as a market was very fragile, was not sustainable, and was not delivering in accordance with expectations of, a very important aspect of what supports public life. the report has now been issued before Christmas, and MHCLG has responded to it, and we welcome that report. It does deal with sort of the matters of timetable, so it's looking at eventually settling a reporting audit timetable around about September, when all the sort of the dust of COVID has settled. It also examined audit fees, and felt that local audit was underpriced, and your committee will have been familiar with conversations my predecessor with you around all of that. The benefit that MHCLG's response is that it's secured extra funding for local authorities to pay for these extra fees. So it announced 15 million, which doesn't sound a great deal in terms of MHCLG's spend on local authorities, but it does actually represent 60% of the local audit fees. So that was good news before Christmas. It's also charged SIPFA with taking forward the recommendations to consider simplification of the financial statements required. They are pretty complex as a document, and that would be of value certainly to making sure that the accounts that you report are more accessible to the public, more understandable. So that can come from two directions. Firstly, simplifying the documents themselves, but also putting in place a requirement for a standardized summary report, again with the objective of reaching out to the reader of the accounts to make them more understandable. Then the final element that MHCLG had been focusing on is the role of the audit committee, the role of the organisation in terms of supporting the environment for strong and constructive audit engagement. So that was the Redmond review. The National Audit Office Code of Audit Practice, as David mentioned, that's changing from what was a binary conclusion, so a pass or fail type assessment with reporting only by exception, to try and make it useful, more useful to users of the audit, yourselves principally, so that the value for money work that we do now will be more holistic. We will, rather than only considering where there are risks, we will consider all elements of the value for money as it fits the definition of the National Audit Office's code. So those are three areas: your arrangements for governance, your arrangements for financial sustainability, and your arrangements for improving economy, efficiency, and effectiveness. So it's more holistic, complete assessment in those areas, with then the audit report covering all those areas, providing you a commentary on all those areas, not just on the areas of concern. We will no longer have the option to qualify your conclusion for VFM, but what we will have is the option of bringing out significant recommendations to you. So we welcome the new VFM code, but you should see something different there. And then the only other point from our update I wanted to mention to you is on page 57, which is the new standard, or the changes to the standard, should I say, ISA 540, which deals with estimates. And that brings in much more of a formal role for the committee in terms of being familiar with the estimates that are within your accounts, how they are constructed, how they're advised upon by potentially experts. I'm not sure how relevant that will be in your case, but certainly where the level of judgment and estimation and certainty is. So as a committee, you're going to need to be much more sighted and aware of what goes on behind the scenes to form those estimates. We're already seeing some audit committees asking for papers from management in these areas to try and flesh out what the new requirements are. So that was it from us. I don't know, David, if you want to just wrap up on COVID on that implication.
I can do. I mean, certainly our expectation is that the audit will be undertaken certainly remotely from an interim perspective. That might change as far as the final accounts perspective is concerned, in terms of our ability to work on site. In terms of the audit approach, Last year we had an addendum to all audit plans introducing a significant risk as far as COVID's concerned. That will change this year, although we will still obviously be alert to both the impacts of COVID on certain aspects of the financial statements, and also in particular the operation of internal controls throughout the whole of the financial year, whereas in 1920 the internal controls operated probably as they always had done for the majority of the financial year, whereas for 2021 everyone, Grant Thornton included, was working primarily from home in that year. So again, that puts a challenge on the operation of internal controls that year. Where it's a paper-based system, then clearly that's less sustainable in a remote environment than where internal controls are electronic. So again, part of our work is to understand your business processes and to understand your internal controls. And again, we'd want to understand the impact, if any, that COVID had in those areas.
Right. Thank you both for that very informative update. I have to say I very much welcome the information in terms of value for money. I think joining that into the whole audit process and reporting makes a great deal of sense. I'm also intrigued in terms of the position on estimates, because I take your comment, John, as far as WECA is concerned, that it is unlikely that is significant. I shouldn't be thinking at this point what it means for Bristol, but I think that is a lot more significant issue there, and one that we and the other authority audit committees will have to consider. Now, actually, though, the question I was going to come up with isn't actually for you two, but I hope Solange and Steve have sort of had warning from our initial agenda meeting that I thought it would be just useful if we could just have an update on how you see the authority's accounts in terms of meeting with the timeline and providing the information to the external auditor for their external audit. Could you just update us on how you see that going, the hiccups and delays that we've had, but how you hope that's going to pan out? So I don't know. Solange?
Steve, you there? Steve has.
Yes, I'm here, Solange.
I hope you appreciate. I wanted you to feel included and not left out from this, so I thought I'd give you a chance to join in.
Yes, of course. Yeah, thank you, Chair. I mean, in terms of the timetable itself, we have drafted a timetable, and we plan to work to having the draft accounts available and up on our website on the 30th of June, which would be a month earlier than we got them on last year. In terms of the challenges this year compared to last year, of course, we will have our ongoing routine day-to-day challenges in terms of combining pulling together the accounts with our day-to-day operational work. But the main two challenges I think we face are both around the implementation of the new system, whereas most of you know last year it was very much manual transactional task to pull together the accounts based on the limited information we can derive from the system we were using with Baines, whereas this year we have a new system, so we are the masters of our own destiny with that. So that the two main challenges are therefore we have implemented a new chart of accounts. So we have now all new account codes, cost codes, and we've introduced an additional layer to the structure in the form of extra categories, which will in theory help us better automate some of the reports in the accounts. So we're working on those at the moment in terms of setting up mapping for that. And the second challenge relating to the new system implementation, it involves setting up a new model for most of the reports. So we're going to use the functionality in Excel for that, but what we really want to do is use the finance system of Aggresso to drive this flow of data through the main accounts, down on through the notes, rather than having the high formula driven Excel file we used last year, which was very cumbersome, very large, and when you open the file, took a little bit of time to open as well. So in summary, really, those are the two main challenges, and the fact that we want to automate most of that data this year will be a massive positive. But we're aware that's a lot of work, putting together reports at the moment, which we're working on, writing of the new reports, all takes time, and which myself and my team are working on at the moment.
And so can I just follow up, Steve, by saying clearly that sounds a massive challenge if you were working in the office with everybody close by. Presumably working from home, that is going to present additional hurdles for you to jump over.
Well, yes, it does. But we've been working at home now for almost a year. We've got a lot of our tasks locked down. The team worked very, very well together, and also the fact that last year, when we went through the year end, it was pretty much a new team, and most of us had limited experience in terms of putting together accounts for a public body of the size of WECA. So now what we've got under our belts is, we've got a year of experience behind us. We put it together once, and from my perspective, a very manually driven set of accounts in terms of having to do most of the work in Excel rather than the finance system. That was a first for me. So this year, I think we've got that added experience of last year, plus the months of already working from home. So I think we're much better placed this year to make sure we deliver on time.
Thank you, Steve. That's really helpful. I must admit, the thought of running a file that size on Excel makes me go cold. It just the concept of it. So I have to say, it makes the job you and your team have done even more remarkable than we thought it was when you explain it like that. Thank you. Does anybody else have questions either for John and David or for Solange and Steve? John.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I was just obviously the Redmond review is going to bring a lot more work for the external auditors to complete also. So the question I wanted to ask, we know certainly for South Gloucestershire, they struggle to get the accounts completed, the audit completed in time. So what assurance will they give that the accounts will be audited in time this year?
John?
It's certainly acknowledge it's a challenge. If we're talking about WECA, it's more manageable, it's more contained, it's more we have more scope, I think, within the available time. The MHCLG consulted on the accounts and audit regs being amended for this year to put back the reporting. The reporting deadline we have now formally is 31st of July. That's what the regulations say, and that is completely unachievable. I think it's recognised that is completely unachievable. The extension that was given last year to the 30th of November, as David said, I think the figure in November was 45% of audits were signed. And that, you're clearly, across all the firms, represents the scale of the challenge. We were ahead of that 45%, but not by a massive amount. We'd signed 55% of ours at the end of November. We still have audits unsigned now, as do the other firms. It is the complexity of local authority accounts now, the quality expectations behind them, and then throwing in the challenges of working remotely through COVID, have put an exceptional amount of pressure on the local audit market, to the point that the Redmond review is absolutely necessary. Otherwise, how could we see that market with confidence going forward into the future? That sounds like a lot of excuses, doesn't it? But in the terms of WECA, as I say, we have it's more straightforward than a unitary authority, I have to say, from our perspective, from our audit perspective. So we can build in that planning. We expect the timetable this year to be September will be a push, knowing where all the other firms are and where we are in terms of our ability to start this year's audits. We expect the timetable to be around about end of October and end of November, maybe, but within that timescale, we would want individual audits to be finished sooner. You know, that allows us to phase our work. So you know, I would expect to be able to sort of agree a plan with yourselves to complete the WECA audit way within that timetable.
I think, if I might say, I think, John, you're being extremely professional and in your response. But I think it's fair to, I mean, Bristol still hasn't signed off yet and is meant to be doing so later this month. I think the problem for WECA's audit would be if all the unitary authorities actually delivered their accounts on time, because then there would be a real challenge of the recourse to sign off. But given the delays that most unitaries appear to have in finalising their accounts, which is in most cases understandable, as long as we are able to get our accounts in ahead of them, then I think, John, it's fair to say you will be able to give them attention. Whereas if everything came in at the same time, you would have to prioritise and choose, and that might be the larger authorities receiving attention ahead of others.
Absolutely, absolutely. Early is good. Early is good because you'll get, you know, well, if we anticipate other authorities' timetables slipping, yeah, you'll get that window then where we can't really motor on with the work in other authorities because because of that. Yeah.
Which in part was behind my question just now to find out our timing to see if we were to be ahead of the game. But hopefully that sort of sets the scene on that one. Does anybody else have any questions? No? Okay. In which case, John and David, thank you very much for your presentation and your time. I cannot guarantee that you will have necessarily such straightforward rides at future meetings, but it's good to start off in that way. So thank you so much. The last item on our agenda is dates of future meetings. And I draw that to members' attention, but I think it's fair to say that there is an element of flexibility, particularly about our immediate next meeting, because if the deadline is slipping for the accounts, I think we discussed, Malcolm, if I'm right, the probability that that meeting may also slip so that we can hold it before the accounts are posted. Am I recording our discussions correctly?
Yeah, no, that's right, Chair. I think we're going to wait until we know. We're anticipating to be a change in dates for the accounts, so we need to keep some flexibility about time in the audit committee to coincide with that.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Unless any members have got any comments on that, in which case, members, I can say I am delighted to bring this meeting to a conclusion. And I see Brenda smiling at me because we both sat in on a meeting that I was chairing yesterday that lasted at least 3 times longer than this. So I can tell you that we're both relieved that this is finishing, but you're probably equally relieved that I'm bringing it to a close. As ever, officers, thank you for your contribution to a really constructive and helpful meeting. Audit Committee will reconvene following the local elections. I declare this meeting closed. Thank you. Bye.